This one is gonna get a little deep. And I'll warn you now, we're gonna touch on some controversial topics and you're likely to get offended. So if you're incapable of challenging the way you think or accepting someone that does, you don't need to watch any further. You have been warned. So a week or two ago, I recorded a video discussing AI and consciousness and posed the question, how could you even identify one over the other? And someone mentioned Carl Jung's book, The Undiscovered Self, in the comments and wanted to know my thoughts. Well, I've been thinking.
Look what happened.
The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know.
10 o'clock Friday night, hundreds of white nationalists stormed the U.S.
How can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also, if I am to be whole.
Fights broke out between right-wing demonstrators and...
The bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes.
With little time to react, slamming to a stop only after it hit a van and another car. Walked in, that car shifted.
The mask crushes out the insight and reflection that are still possible with the individual. Carl Jung said that. But who was Carl Jung? And how do his ideas on psychology and our understanding of ourselves impact or draw conclusions on today's society? What can we learn from his works? And how can we avoid this path that humanity has stumbled down? Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist, and he argued that the future of our civilization depends on our ability as individuals to resist the collective forces of society. We are not doing a good job. He goes on to say that this requires that we face our fear of the duality of the human psyche, recognizing the existence of good and the capacity for evil in every individual.
Jung was born in 1875 in Caswell, Switzerland, to a relatively impoverished rural pastor, Paul Jung, and a depressed, eccentric, spirit-seeing mother, Emily Jung. Jung was a very introverted and isolated child who spent much of his time alone, engaging in activities of make-believe, projection, disassociation, and analyzing the adults in his life.
Jung was a pioneer in psychology. He differed from Freud, believing that the unconscious mind wasn't a place for repressed thoughts, but a window into our truest self that every person needed to discover. He believed modern humans are caught in a struggle between discovering their true selves and conforming to the collective identity imposed by society. You see, there's this thing inside all of us. Carl Jung called it the undiscovered self. I like to call it the AI within. Some might even argue it's the core foundation of humanity, but it's a part of our subconscious that is often ignored. And that leads to this propensity for humans to lose themselves in the fray of the cries of the many until their voice becomes nothing more than an amplification for a singular idea that no longer represents who they are. Now, Carl says this occurs unconsciously because the undiscovered self is, well, undiscovered. And I think the bulk of issues we face in today's society are caused by the denial of this undiscovered self. And Carl Jung wrote this. He was warning about communism and saw religion as kind of a counterbalance to this, as a way for individuals to find themselves and reflect inward. He warned that modern society suppressed individual potential by imposing collective identities. You can see the extrapolation of his fears not only in today's political landscape, but several movements where a rampant minority will collectively take over the majority, sending the masses in one direction or the other.
What's exciting to me is that I think this is the first time in my life that I've ever seen so much communication on these subjects. And I think so much recognition about the consequences of toxic tribalism, this tribal thinking that everyone seems to be engaged in on the right and on the left.
This is essentially our desire to be part of a group, even when that group doesn't represent who you are. Politics is a perfect example. You're either conservative or you're liberal, when in reality, your individual views fall across the spectrum. You're either Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, or all lives matter. If you don't accept the notion that there are hundreds of genders, then you're transphobic. You're either an ally or an enemy. And this tribalism that this creates is what's tearing this country apart.
Human beings are tribal. We're hardwired that way. We need to belong to groups. The problem is when tribalism takes over a political system.
This is how these massive movements gain traction, by convincing the individuals that they are in fact part of a larger force, and they should forego their personal or individual desires because the collective's desires are not only more important, but are actually the things they should be concerned with. The rise of this groupthink has only metastasized politicized. As you see more political polarization, and social media helps this because it creates these bubbles where you're only hearing things that shout down the individual and make you feel that your allegiance to one particular group is all that matters. And this is where you see the breakdown of critical, independent thought. Everyone wants to be part of something. And in today's society, in order to do that, you have to throw away or ignore all the other parts of yourself that don't fit the group mold. And Jung warned us about how this collective thinking just breeds extremism and authoritarianism, because without self-awareness, people become easily manipulated, seeking meaning in external ideologies rather than looking within. He says this leads to alienation, loss of autonomy, and an inability to make independent decisions. And you see that played out every day, which is why people like Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pashew, and David Van Nuys are constantly screaming about.
Oh, any political position that puts someone's group identity ahead of their individuality is a regression to a tribalism that will definitely become violent. Because that's what happens to tribes.
Jung says that when individuals fail to discover their true selves, society risks stagnation or collapse, which is pretty bad. Kind of what we're seeing right now. We have mental health crisis on the rise, families are crumbling, the division in this country is increasing, teens are lost, adults are lost, and the result is chaos in every direction you turn. So what can we do? How can we reverse what has already happened, or how can we at least stop what is currently going on in the country? Well, in the words of Jung, we need to discover our undiscovered self. But doing that is gonna take a bit of work. Self-reflection and meditation are good places to start. Journaling and therapy are other tools, but rejecting tribalism and group thinking and starting to question things yourself will put you on a better path. If your own identity gets lost in the group, then that's a group that you don't need to be in. In a world that's constantly telling you who you are and who you need to be, discovering yourself is the most radical thing you can do. Now, I would encourage everyone to read The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. It's a pretty interesting read, and if nothing else, it's a pretty short book. And tell me your thoughts in the comments. Do you think America is heading down the wrong path? And what do we need to do to fix it? And if you're interested in more thought-provoking content on a wide range of topics, or just going on a journey of learning with me, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.